Welcome to Asia Outlook. I'm Melody and I'm here to report the top stories from around Asia. The Philippine president has decided to lift martial law in the country's south by year's end. President Rodrigo Duterte placed the region of Mindanao under martial law in May of 2017, following 3 separate terrorist attacks in Marawi. The spokesman says Duterte is confident in the capability of security forces to maintain peace and security in the region. The announcement comes a week after the country's defense secretary recommended lifting martial law.
President Rodrigo Duterte placed the region of Mindanao under martial law in May 2017 following 3 separate terrorist attacks in Marawi. The spokesman says Duterte is confident in the capability of security forces to maintain peace and security in the region. The announcement comes a week after the country's defense secretary recommended lifting martial law.
After the May 2018 Malaysian elections, the new government suspended the multi-billion-dollar East Coast Rail Link project. The massive Belt and Road Initiative project was to be built by the China Communications Construction Company. But after lengthy negotiations, the rail project is back on track. CGTN Ryan Meltzer has more on this story.
Work progressing on a 2.9-kilometer long tunnel, part of the 640-kilometer rail line that will link Malaysia's capital to the underdeveloped east coast and north to the Thai border. Heavy rains at this time of year make the rock unstable and increase the risk of landslides.
The difficulty we face now is because of monsoon season. It will slow us down. We are very careful every step of the way.
During the 9-month suspension of the project, most of China Construction Communications local workers were let go, while a lucky few were transferred to other CCCC projects.
They give me a call saying that, hey, Chia, I really need you to be back, to actually tidy up things and start moving on again. I believe that it's still a good opportunity for me to carry on with that company and also the portfolio. And since it's a mega project for the country, I think it's good to be part of it.
CCCC has just launched a roadshow to recruit locals, drawing thousands of job seekers in the first couple of days, some from hundreds of kilometers away.
I studied engineering, so I'm excited to follow my profession. I studied automotive engineering, so this is quite connected to my field. I'd be excited to be able to work for this company.
Aside from slashing the cost of the project by about 1/3, the deal to resurrect the ECRL also guarantees that local contractors will get at least 40% of the civil works jobs, up from 30% previously.
Malaysia will pay more than $10 billion to build the rail line, largely with Chinese financing. But under the new deal, CCCC will form a partnership with Malaysia's Rail Corporation to jointly operate and maintain the line, as well as sharing any profits or losses. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Pahang, Malaysia.
The Taliban has claimed responsibility for an attack on a U.S. military base in Afghanistan. A spokesperson for the group says the assault on Bagram Air Base north of Kabul is still ongoing. The Bagram district governor says 1 person was killed and 87 were injured. The talks between the U.S. and the Taliban had been called off by President Donald Trump in September after the attack by the group killed an American soldier. Russia's top diplomat met with U.S. officials on Tuesday, and it was anything but a charm offensive. Sergei Lavrov clashed with his U.S. counterpart Mike Pompeo on a number of divisive topics. Lavrov later met with U.S. President Donald Trump. Kate Fisher has more.
Few words from Russia's foreign minister as he arrived at the White House to meet President Trump. But Sergei Lavrov had more to say earlier at the State Department, including a strong denial of Russian meddling in the 2016 US presidential election.
All speculations about our alleged interference in domestic processes in the United States are baseless.
The Iran nuclear deal also came up between the two diplomats.
We also spoke about the need to continue our discussion about the paths, how to overcome the crisis around the Iranian nuclear program. You are well aware of our position. We believe it is necessary to do everything in our power to save the JCPOA in order to ensure the peaceful nature of Iranian nuclear research.
Other issues on the agenda during their 3-hour meeting behind closed doors included Syria, economic relations and Ukraine. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was clear. The United States wouldn't budge from its position that Russia needs to return the Crimean Peninsula to Ukrainian control.
We also spent a fair amount of time talking about Ukraine. It was a major part of our conversations. Foreign Minister Lavrov just returned from Paris, where President Putin and President Zelensky had substantive conversations. I'm proud of what this administration has done in the defense of that country's sovereignty and security. I reiterated to Foreign Minister Lavrov that Crimea belongs to Ukraine and that the resolution of the conflict in eastern Ukraine begins with adherence to commitments made under the Minsk agreements.
On arms control, the Russians want the Trump administration to renegotiate a treaty designed to reduce nuclear weapons. But the US wants China to be included in any new agreement. The White House says that Trump reiterated all of this during his meeting with Lavrov, adding that they also reviewed the state of relations with China, with Trump emphasising the need for fair and reciprocal trade. Kate Fisher, CGTN, Washington.
Heroes and villains, gamers and comic book enthusiasts, movie and TV buffs, toy lovers, and of course, cosplayers. Singapore Comic Con 2019 was truly an exciting gathering of all things pop culture, both Western and Asian. Though in its 12th edition, it was previously known as the Singapore Toy, Game and Comic Convention, or STGCC, rebranded this year was the first time that it was held under the name Comic Con. Crowds were full of people dressed as their favorite movie and comic book characters. There were Spider-Man, Deadpools, Star Wars Stormtroopers, a Chewbacca, some Captain Americas. Well, you get the picture. Let's take a look.
I'm seeing a lot more families coming. I'm seeing a lot more children coming. Parents are dressing up their kids in all kinds of outfits.
It's a thing and it brings a lot of people together, people with the same likes and hobbies.
The whole community is friendly, from your toy collectors to your comic.
I am thankful.
Soraka from League of Legends.
But the cosplayers, they really make this experience something memorable.
Really awesome, it's crowded, but I love the view here and also it's very fun though.
We see more crowd coming in and we see more fellow cosplayers, so it's a great thing for the cosplaying scene in Singapore.
I don't know what it is, but the energy is totally different once you walk in. There are like a whole bunch of Star Wars movies, which I think everyone, like it appeals to everybody, and it's just so exciting to be here.
This is amazing. I would not have thought that something like this could exist in Singapore.
India's government is all set to pass a controversial citizenship law that would exclude the Muslim community in neighboring countries from becoming Indian citizens. India's lower house passed the citizenship bill around midnight on Monday, after 12 hours of debate. India's upper house of parliament is to vote on the bill on Wednesday. The legislation has created huge political controversy in the country. Many experts fear it may divide Indian society on religious lines. Let's look at the contents of the proposed law with Ishrang Garg.
In this case, the idea, according to them, is to correct a historic wrong. They say there are a number of Hindus, Sikhs, Jains in the neighboring countries of Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan who have faced persecution for the past 70 years, and they did not have, quote-unquote, a country to turn to. Now with this bill, they will have a safe haven in India. And as far as the question of the Muslim communities is raised, the Indian government says that there are a number of Islamic countries where Muslim communities could find safe haven. Of course, the critics then argue that this does violate the secular spirit of the Indian Constitution, and this will be the first time when a law is being put into place that categorically grants citizenship on the basis of religion.
This is Asia Outlook broadcasting from Myanmar International Radio. You can visit our website at mradio.com.mm. You can also listen to our radio programs live on the website. Myanmar's Foreign Minister Daw Aung San Suu Kyi met with her counterpart visiting Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. In their meeting on Saturday, the two ministers pledged to strengthen communications and high-level exchanges between the two countries. In 2020, China and Myanmar will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the establishment of their diplomatic ties. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said this was an opportunity to strengthen bilateral relations and fast-track major projects, such as China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, as well as cooperation on trade and culture. Cambodia is experiencing more flooding in its wet season and longer droughts in the dry season, both of which threaten the livelihoods of 80% of Cambodia's population, who rely mostly on crop production. Many farmers have been forced to abandon the fields. Dastia Saokha has more from Cambodia.
Long shadows of Cambodia's edifices of wealth and progress conceal a deeper darkness. Each brick fueling the nation's growth symbolizes the blood, sweat, and pain of the country's poorest inhabitants. It's the type of job nobody chooses. The air is thick with soot catching in the throat. It is so hot the heat stings every part of your body. The hours are long, the work grueling and often dangerous. Children are running everywhere. There is no safety equipment. Stories of illnesses and debt bondage are commonplace. Mi Charong came to this brick kiln with his parents years ago. He now lives here with his wife and parents. His wife just suffered a miscarriage. He makes just $2.50 a day if he's lucky. He is $1,900 in debt. Every day is a struggle for Mi Charong and the tens of thousands of people working in over 400 brick kilns across Cambodia.
The living conditions in this brick kiln is horrific. Entire families live in these tiny little huts. There's no toilet, no electricity, no running water. It's overcrowded, poorly maintained, completely lacking in sanitation. Yet despite this living condition, it is an industry that is in no shortage of new recruits.
But why? Debts that push people to the kilns are today driven by new realities. In spite of fast development and economic growth, almost 80% of Cambodians live in rural areas. About 45% of the labor force directly employed in agriculture. But the agricultural sector has been battered by weather extremes in recent years.
10 ឆ្នាំមុនគាត់ធ្វើស្រែបានផលល្អប្រភពត្រីធម្មជាតិគាត់អាចរកបានបរិភោគនិងបានលក់ថែមទៀតអញ្ចឹងណាបាទអញ្ចឹងបងថ្ងៃទៅពួកគាត់អត់សូវមានបំណុល
For almost every farmer in this province, it is now a story of coping rather than doing, of managing in whatever way possible the task of farming in an environment no longer suited to age-old methods.
ខុសប្លែកថាចេះចាស់ 3% នៅសល់តែ 1% ទេអស់ហើយព្រោះទឹកក៏អត់មានព្រោះវាស្កកទាំងអស់អត់មាននេះណាឃើញស្រាប់ហើយដាក់
Kon Sokia knows that all it takes is just one failed harvest that can lead her family into unsustainable levels of debt. And for the indebted farmers, one of the only remaining choices is to sell the family debt to the owner of a brick kiln and set out on what they know in advance will be a journey in one direction. Lucita Saogao, CGTN, Kandal Province, Cambodia.
The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration says the Boeing 737 MAX will not be approved for flight by the end of this year, following two recent crashes. The FAA told a congressional hearing it's investigating production issues with the jet, and several steps still need to be completed, making approval unlikely until January at the earliest. Boeing say it could cut or even halt production of the jet if the green light takes too long. The probes come after 737 MAX crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia and allegations by a former manager of unsafe production practices at a key Boeing plant. Russian President Vladimir Putin say Moscow has grounds to appeal a decision by the World Anti-Doping Agency to bar Russia from major sporting events. He slams the move as a politically motivated ruling that contradicts the Olympic Charter. The country's Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev called the decision anti-Russian hysteria. Russ Collin has more from Moscow.
A major announcement, but no major surprise. The World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, banning Russia from global sport for 4 years. The wide-ranging sanctions recommended by WADA's review committee last month endorsed on Monday. Russian athletes barred from competing under the Russian flag at next year's Summer Olympics in Tokyo and the Beijing 2022 Winter Games.
Russia was afforded every opportunity to get its house in order and to rejoin the global anti-doping community for the good of its athletes and for the integrity of sport, but it chose instead a different route.
Russian officials are also prevented from attending international sporting events, and the men's national football team won't be allowed to play under the Russian flag at the 2022 World Cup. Russia shut out on the world stage after being found to be non-compliant, providing incomplete or inauthentic anti-doping data, and fabricated, planted or deleted samples.
For many Russian politicians, this was a political decision. One MP saying that while it is a blow to Russian sport, the sanctions imposed are just a continuation of attempts to push Russia out of the global sporting arena. And for the Kremlin, this is a decision that must be appealed against.
The Court of Arbitration for Sport has overturned doping bans for some Russian athletes in the past, but the man at the top of the Russian Anti-Doping Agency thinks Moscow will not win the case this time around. Yuri Ganis says two things are critical for the country to move forward.
It's crucial for us to change approach, the terrible old-school ineffective approach that is driving our sport deeper into deadlock. That's number one. Number two is that we need to change the people. It's crucial because of the tragedy of the current situation. 5 years into this crisis and we have 4 more years ahead. Altogether it's 9 years. It's someone's whole career in some sports.
After the success of the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympics and the prestige of hosting last year's Men's Football World Cup, Russia risks being left on the sidelines of global sport. Doping data manipulation, an illicit way to try to improve medal chances, but a move that leaves Russia watching from the stands. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Moscow.
The brutal gang rape and murder of a 27-year-old woman in the southern Indian city of Hyderabad has women across India learning more about self-defense. Turning to everything from karate to pepper spray to control of their own personal safety, more than 100 women showed up at self-defense training camps in Kolkata on Sunday, with volunteer groups setting up similar camps across the country. Indian police registered more than 32,000 cases of rape in 2017 alone. Berlin's giant panda cubs born in September made their first public appearance for a naming ceremony. They were given the names Meng Sheng and Meng Huan, which means desired dream and fulfilled dream. The names were presented in German and Chinese by Berlin Mayor Michael Müller and the Chinese ambassador Wu Kan. The two little pandas are the first born in Germany and will be presented to the public at the beginning of 2020. once they're able to walk on their own. This is Asia Outlook broadcasting live from Myanmar International Radio. On FM, make sure you catch us on 96.1 FM in Yangon, 96.5 in Mandalay, and 96.7 in Naypyidaw. You can also download MI Radio app on both iOS and Android devices for your own convenience. While South Korea's pop culture mostly projects a wholesome image on stage and screen, it has been marred by a series of untimely deaths and criminal cases that have revealed a darker side to the industry. Let's take a look.
정말 죄송합니다. 저는 용서받을 수 없는 범죄를 저질렀습니다.
Monday meeting among the leaders of Russia and Ukraine have elected other agreements. But other crucial issues were being unresolved, just when to hold a local election and when to transfer the control of the borders in rebel-held regions. Zelensky said he wished that more could have been achieved at the summit, but both leaders agreed to meet again in 4 months. Mediator German Chancellor Angela Merkel said both parties expressed goodwill towards the peace process. The Normandy 4 is a contact group for Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany to resolve the conflict in eastern Ukraine. The summit is the first try in 3 years. The South-South Human Rights Forum was held in Beijing on Tuesday. The forum gathers 300 scholars and officials from over 80 developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Themed Culture Diversity and the Development of Global Human Rights. It's the second time China has held this forum, which aims to build an exchange platform for the joint development of different civilizations. Louis Yang has more.
Aiming to build an exchange platform for the joint development of different civilizations is the top priority for those at the second South-South Human Rights Forum in Beijing. Participants all agree that seeking coexistence through differences is the basis for mutual learning and a dialogue among civilizations. They say differences should not be grounds for confrontation.
It's extremely important to tell other countries and cultural areas that China also has its own philosophy in terms of human rights, which doesn't mean that China doesn't recognize universal human rights, as we are trying to say. There are some basic universal values in terms of human rights, but also that China has its own philosophy in that respect due to the 1,000 years of history and development.
Participants say human rights are the foundation and the cornerstone of all civilizations. They strongly criticized what they call the U.S. double standards on human rights. They say Western society today doesn't respect the cultural diversity or the rights of other countries to independently choose the path of human rights development.
Have realized through the time that some countries, especially countries of the West, are using human rights as a motive to get to wealth, to commodities of developing countries. There are human rights in China, there are human rights in Africa. There is no lesson. We don't have any lesson to learn from the West in terms of human rights. If yes, it can be in terms of sharing. They can have a lesson to teach, but they can also have a lesson to learn from human rights in our countries.
Experts also shared their thoughts on topics such as building a community with a shared future for mankind and global human rights governance. They also discussed the Belt and Road Initiative promotes the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Earlier this year, China published a white paper on 70 years of progress on human rights. The white paper noted China had opened a new path of human rights protection based on its national conditions and increased the diversity of human civilization. During the forum, participants widely praised China's contributions to global poverty reduction and efforts on climate change. Liu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
A rare breakthrough for Washington and Tehran after months of tensions. The U.S. and Iran exchanged prisoners on Saturday, a negotiation brokered by the Swiss government. Gales Gibson has more from Washington.
The two prisoners were flown to Zurich in Switzerland for the exchange. Xie Wang, a Chinese-American academic, was arrested in Iran in 2016, accused of collaborating with foreign governments. Masoud Soleimani, the Iranian citizen, was arrested in Chicago last year, accused of violating trade sanctions by exporting biological material to Iran. Now, both men denied those charges against them. Wang has been sent to a U.S. airbase in Germany for medical checks before he heads home to the U.S. After being detained for 3 years, Wang's wife described her relief in a statement, saying, "Our family is complete once again." Now, multiple U.S. administrations have accused Iran of using prisoners as bargaining chips, and several U.S. citizens are still locked up in the country. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a tweet, "We will not rest until we bring every American detained in Iran and around the world back home to their loved ones." Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif also put out a tweet simply saying, "Glad that Professor Masoud Soleimani and Mr. Xie Wang will be joining their families shortly. Many thanks to all engaged, particularly the Swiss government." Now, the reason he thanked the Swiss government there is that Switzerland is the traditional broker between the US and Iran, as the two countries haven't had diplomatic relations for several decades now. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
Private enterprises contributed the largest share of China's foreign trade volume over the first 11 months of 2019. Yiwu City in Zhejiang Province is known as the epicenter of commodity retail. It's also the largest manufacturer of Christmas goods that export to all over the world. As the holiday approaches, you can almost feel the mood in the shopping mall. Let's take a closer look.
This is the Yiwu International Trade Market in East China's Zhejiang Province, where all kinds of small commodity products are manufactured and exported to the rest of the world. The Christmas decor section has over 400 vendors. Over 80% of the world's Christmas decors are made here. One of the vendors, named Chen Xiaofang, is presenting the Christmas products in her store, ranging from hats, clothes, to socks. There are more than 500 kinds of hats alone. Chen says 80% of her goods are exported to countries in Central and Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia.
Well, the export volume is now larger than ever, but the profit margin is much thinner. Costs have gone up for both raw materials and labor.
Lu Mingying has been selling Christmas tree for 17 years. Lu says sales has gone up this year because of the new products they developed. The factories are already overloaded with orders, and she even had to cancel many late orders.
Orders have increased 30% on year. Our new products have attracted more clients. We used to serve a lot of Russian clients when their economy performed well. Now most of our clients are from Europe, US, and the rest of the world. During the first 10 months of 2019, Christmas goods exported from EU increased by 24% on year to 1.9 billion yuan. Usually, this sector's export peak comes during August and September. You could see amounts of containers carrying these Christmas goods.
More and more private enterprises are strengthening their competitiveness while increasing their products' added value. Private sector's exports and imports totaled 12.12 trillion yuan in the January-November period, up 10.4% and accounting for 42.5% of the country's total foreign trade.
Myanmar's state councillor and foreign minister leader Daw Aung San Suu Kyi has rejected allegations of genocidal intent by the military. Let's take a listen.
Regrettably, the Gambia has placed before the court an incomplete and misleading factual picture of the situation in Rakhine State in Myanmar. Yet it is of the utmost importance that the court assess the situation obtaining on the ground in Rakhine dispassionately and accurately. The situation in Rakhine is complex and not easy to fathom, but one thing surely touches all of us equally: the sufferings of the many innocent people whose lives were torn apart as a consequence of the armed conflicts of 2016 and 2017, in particular, those who have had to flee their homes and are now living in camps in Cox's Bazar.
And that's all we have for today's Asia Outlook on MI Radio. Thank you for being with us. I am Melody. We'll be back next week. Until next time.